Rumor has it that the president of the Franklin Group, Stark Green, is ready to move on after the painful death of his fiancée, millionaire heiress, Nancy Johnson, 3 years ago. Mr. Green has been seen with his new girlfriend, internationally renowned model Amelia Renner, cuddled up on casual dates the last several weeks. The entertainment news anchor smiled broadly as she spoke into the camera. The TV was the only light in the dark hospital room. A woman with a bandaged face lay in bed and watched the show with rage in her heart. The death of his fiancée, Nancy Johnson. The woman snorted. Surprise, everyone. Nancy Johnson's not dead. Not completely. Nancy used a remote to lower the volume, unable to listen to that crap a second longer. Her ruined face was dressed in bandages. Beneath the hospital blanket, her shattered legs had long since withered away. The outside world thought she was dead, that she had been mourned by her beloved fiancé, Stark Green. However, in reality, Nancy was Stark's prisoner. He'd faked her death and hidden her away. He'd broken her body so she couldn't run. He gave her medicines that kept her weak and reliant upon him. Nancy heard a man's footsteps and a woman's laughter heading down the outside hall, drawing nearer to her room. Nancy grew tense. She wanted to get off the bed and escape, but her lower body was paralyzed. Even though she knew it was useless, she still wanted to get away from that man. She hated the sound of his voice. As the door opened, Nancy jerked away and fell out of bed. She landed on the floor in front of the man and the woman. The man's voice was low when he called out, "Nancy!" He stretched out his hand to support her. "Why do you get so excited every time you see me? Could you still be in love?" She looked up at the man in front of her and trembled all over. Her damaged vocal cords made an unpleasant sound as she croaked out, "Stark, go to hell!" "Nancy, your temper is still so bad." Stark sighed and squatted down to her level. He looked at himself on the television screen. "Why do you want to make yourself unhappy?" Amelia, the international model herself, stood behind him in red stiletto heels. She donned a beautiful black evening dress that accentuated her gorgeous figure. She held onto Stark's arm when he stood back up and smirked at Nancy, who was still on the ground. "Let's not waste time talking to her, Stark. Let's get down to business." "Get down to business?" Stark hugged Amelia and pressed his lips against hers. "I love it when you talk dirty." They both chuckled. "You bastards!" Nancy shook with rage. She only had one good eye left, and she hated that this was all she had to look at. She did her best to crawl towards Stark, mouth open, ready to bite him if she could. He backed away with ease, and she gave a frustrated scream. "Stop yelling! Your voice is horrible." Amelia covered her ears. "Shut up!" Stark yelled at Nancy. He gave a sick grin. "Nancy, are you jealous of Amelia?" Why wouldn't she be? Even before she was ugly and crippled, she could never match me. Amelia smirked. Who'd want to touch her now? Nancy trembled when she heard their teasing laughter. A wave of hatred washed over her soul. With a burst of strength, she tried to lift herself up and wrap her hands around his neck to choke him. But Stark grabbed Nancy first and slammed her back into the hospital bed. "You want to kill me? You can't even try." Stark gripped her bandaged, ruined face in his hand. "Now, let's get started." As he spoke, Amelia rushed over and immediately put Nancy in handcuffs. Stark took a surgical blade out of his pocket and looked down on the woman in the bed. "Nancy, if your father saw that his scalpel was used to snap your tendons, how would he react?" Nancy struggled violently. Anyone who saw her now would be shocked at her fate. She'd been born into a charmed life, the daughter of Houston's illustrious Johnson family. Her mother, Lily, had been CEO of the Franklin Group, one of the wealthiest companies in the country, while her father, Edward, had been an esteemed neurosurgeon. They'd had 2 children, Nancy and her younger brother Jacob, and the family had been close and loving. 20 years ago, Edward had adopted Stark, then only 9 years old. He treated the orphan boy like he was his own son, and Stark had always been obedient and grateful. Stark had treated Nancy, 2 years his junior, with love and care. They'd been friends, and once they grew up, Stark had told Nancy he was in love with her. Nancy's father had been delighted by the sensible match. After a brief courtship, Nancy had accepted Stark's proposal of marriage. The Johnsons threw a lavish engagement party for them. During that party, Nancy discovered that Stark and Amelia were having an affair. She'd been horrified when she walked in on them screwing in a darkened bedroom. "The engagement is off, Stark," she'd yelled. "Oh, no." He'd smile, revealing his true colors for the first time. "You're not getting away that easy, Nancy." Stark kidnapped Nancy and brought her to this room on this yacht. He shattered both her legs at the hips and the kneecap. After that, he'd brought Amelia over, and she'd thrown sulfuric acid on Nancy's face. The pain had made life worse than death. Nancy languished in a fog for months. Eventually, Stark had the television installed. That was how she learned about the outside world. Stark had circulated the news that Nancy had died, which in turn had caused Nancy's mother to commit suicide. Before she killed herself, Lily handed the company over to Stark to manage. Edward went crazy from losing his wife and daughter. Soon after, the city's top neurosurgeon disappeared. Edward became a recluse, only coming out of retirement to sign a document now and again. Stark, ever the cunning man, kept a low profile and lived in seclusion for years to make everyone believe his grief was real. He also managed Nancy's younger brother, Jacob, who had lost his ability to speak in his shock at all the tragedy. Stark acquired control of Nancy's father's reputed hospital and the Franklin Group. He had all her family's money. He had her brother under his thumb. He had Amelia. He had everything he'd ever wanted. And it only cost Nancy everything she'd ever loved. "You're a monster, Stark," Nancy croaked. "All these years. Just tell me what you've done with my father." She roared like a beast, but Stark didn't care about it at all. "What's wrong? You want to see your father?" Stark smiled coldly. "Would seeing him make you happy? Why didn't you say so in the first place?" "What?" Nancy was shocked as Stark turned around and walked out. Before long, he returned, pushing a wheelchair. When she saw the chair's occupant, Nancy's tears flowed. "Dad!" Her father trembled when he saw her. That little joyful response caused Stark to grab Edward by the collar and slap him. His eyes were filled with malice. "Don't look so satisfied. You've had to watch every little step your daughter's made on her transformational journey." Stark glared at her. "Every time I've beaten or broken you, I've had it recorded and shown to your dear old dad here." "Why are you doing this?" Nancy hissed. "Why keep us alive at all?" "Simple. I've needed old Edward's signature on documents over the years. He stayed alive because he knew I'd kill you if he'd killed himself. It's been a perfect system. You know, don't you, that if all the legal heirs of the Johnson estate die, the bulk of your property is immediately donated to an international charity organization?" Stark chuckled. "But your dear little brother Jacob is finally growing up. He'll be a legal adult soon, which means I can use him as my puppet. After that, dear Johnsons, means I have no further need of you, either of you." With that, he punched Edward right in his face. The poor man tumbled out of his wheelchair and lay on the ground. Seeing her father being beaten, Nancy struggled until her wrist had been scraped raw by the handcuffs. Amelia stood over Nancy's bed, laughing. "Now your daddy gets to watch me slice you apart one piece at a time." She held the scalpel over Nancy's face. "Let's start with the nose. Or maybe the one good eye." Nancy screamed. Seeing his daughter in danger, Edward called on what remained of his strength. His legs were trembling as he stood and rushed at Amelia, managing to snatch the blade from her hand. However, Stark was faster than him. He kicked Edward aside and took the knife. He strode to Nancy's bed and cut her wrist with force. He knew how to break a person's tendons and not hurt their arteries. Nancy's hand fell down powerlessly, and she cried out in pain. Blood dripped to the ground. Her slender fingers, once beautiful, were now as weak as withered branches. When Edward saw this, he got up again and rushed at Stark, ready to fight to the death. However, the stronger man knocked him down and kicked him. On the bed, Nancy growled like a beast. Her family was destroyed. Her father humiliated in front of her, but her hands and feet were crippled. She could only watch helplessly. "Nancy, why does your family have to be so difficult?" Stark asked. "It seems that I don't have any other options left." Stark gave Amelia a look, and she immediately left, returning with an oil can. When Nancy saw the oil, she immediately understood what they were going to do. They were going to burn her and her father to death and destroy all evidence. Tomorrow morning's news would be, Houston's famous neurosurgeon, Edward Johnson, died alongside his attendant nurse during a fire on his vacation in the sea. "Don't do this," Nancy screamed. Stark poured oil on Nancy and Edward's faces and bodies. He splattered oil around the room. Amelia took out a book of matches and struck one. The moment the fire flared to life, Nancy muttered, "If I do get another life, I will make you pay with blood." Amelia threw the lit match to the ground and escaped the room with Stark. The flames licked over Nancy's entire body. She and Edward screamed. The pain pierced her soul, spreading through her body and mind. As she died, Nancy whispered, "Jacob, I'm so sorry we couldn't protect you. You have to stay alive. If there's a God, then I hope he'll save you from this devil." The fire on the yacht burned for an entire night. The next day, the boat sank into the deep sea. The waves swallowed the burned wreck, leaving only white foam behind. It felt like a dream, or a nightmare, as Nancy slowly resurfaced to consciousness. She didn't know where she was. She only knew that her body was hot, almost feverish. Her lips felt as though they'd been burned by flame. She recalled her own screams and smells of smoke. She groaned in pain at the memory. "What the hell are you doing here?" A cold voice snapped. Just like that, the pain departed. Nancy opened her eyes and found that she was not dead. She was very much alive. And she wasn't burned either. She wasn't injured in any way. Most shocking of all, she wasn't on the yacht, and she wasn't alone. She was just outside of someone's bathroom, fragrant steam from a recent shower all around her, and she was collapsed, face to face with a nearly naked man. The man wore a towel around his waist, and his upper body was still quite wet. His muscles were clearly defined, sculpted as if by a master artist. He was tall, and his face was exquisitely angular. Even though he was only wearing a towel, he had the total confidence of a 4-star general. "What the hell is this?" The man looked furious with her. "Are you all right?" She must have fainted against him. Nancy freed herself and took a step back. She heard the clack of her shoes on a marble floor and trembled. She was standing. She could walk. She'd been crippled the past 3 years, left alone in the dark. And now she was standing without any pain. What the hell is going on? Nancy studied her hands. Her tendons hadn't been cut, and when she touched her face, she found that there were no traces of sulfuric acid burns. She could see perfectly well out of both eyes. She was healed. Completely. Her eyes started to fill with tears. "I hope this isn't a dream." she whispered. Maria, are you on drugs or something? The man gave an astonished laugh. Who's Maria? Nancy thought. Why is he looking at me? Are you talking to me? Nancy asked. Unbelievable. The handsome man rolled his eyes as he clasped Nancy by her wrist and pulled her into the bathroom. Take a look. Who else would I be talking to? Who else is here? With that, he left her standing there gaping at her reflection in the mirror. Only this wasn't Nancy's reflection. This was a person she'd never seen before. Her figure was slender, her skin fair and delicate. Her hands and feet were intact, with no signs of scarring or breaks. Even though she was wearing a great amount of makeup, the girl in the mirror was young. She couldn't be more than 20 years old. Nancy's old body had been tall, with chestnut brown hair. This new body was petite, with a waterfall of long black hair that tumbled past her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but more than that, she was not herself. Nancy covered her mouth with a manicured hand. The person in the mirror made the same movement. Testing herself, making certain this wasn't a dream or a misunderstanding, she raised her hand, and the reflection also raised hers. No mistaking it. This was her new body. She couldn't hold it in any longer, and tears rolled down her face when she realized that this was not a dream. When Nancy had died, her soul had been reborn into this strange girl for some reason. Is this a sign from God? Is He allowing me a chance to get revenge on my enemies? Her heart sped up with the pleasure at the idea. She ran the faucet and splashed cold water onto her face to wake up. Memories gradually bubbled up in her mind, memories that weren't Nancy's. She quickly put the pieces together. This body had belonged to Maria Miller, a junior at New York University. Maria was pursuing a bachelor's in artificial intelligence. Because of her excellent scores, she'd been selected for a project in an esteemed New York AI laboratory. The half-naked man's name was Jonathan Davis. He belonged to the Davis family, one of the leading financial and tech giants in the United States. Not even 30 years old, Jonathan was already the CEO of the Davis Group. He had a reputation for being fierce and ruthless. Nancy dug through Maria's memories, searching for why the girl had come here. Did she have a crush on Jonathan? No. The memory came up clearly. Maria is in love with Jonathan's nephew, Steve. She came up here to find him, but walked into the wrong bedroom and ran into Jonathan. Nancy felt a bit dizzy and realized that Maria was actually quite drunk. Maria was a middle-aged girl whose social climbing father wanted her to seduce a rich, powerful man. He'd sent her to the Davis house with a bottle of wine as a gift for Steve, hoping he and Maria would drink it together. But Steve wasn't attracted to Maria. He'd left her, and, miserable, she drank the whole bottle of wine herself. Drunk and in a daze, she'd gone looking for Steve and entered Jonathan's bathroom instead. At least now I know the backstory, she thought. Nancy turned off the water, toweled off, and exited the bathroom. Jonathan had already gotten dressed and left. Nancy went downstairs to the living room, where she found a mature and dignified-looking woman. This was Sophia Davis, Jonathan's sister-in-law and Steve's mother. Sophia was watching television and drinking a cup of coffee. "Good morning, Mrs. Davis," Nancy said. She hoped she sounded like Maria. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stay over so long." "It's perfectly all right." Sophia looked smug. "I hope your hangover isn't too terrible, dear. Steve was so worried when you drank all that wine by yourself. It's not good for a girl as young as you are to be foolish with alcohol." "That's true," Nancy said weakly. "Well, sorry to disturb you. I'd better head out. I don't want to be late for class." "Oh, you won't stay for breakfast?" Sophia asked. If Maria were still, Maria, she would definitely take the opportunity to stay. However, Nancy was desperate to get out of here. She smiled. "Thank you so much for asking, but I'm afraid I have to go." Nancy was about to leave when the television suddenly attracted her attention. It's been 3 days since Edward Johnson perished in a fire off the Florida coast. CEO of Franklin Group, Stark Green, has been discharged from the hospital this morning. Mr. Green suffered some damage from smoke inhalation during a futile attempt to rescue Mr. Johnson, his foster father. Now that he's been released with a clean bill of health, Mr. Green is prepping for the first test of the Franklin Group's unmanned vehicle, YR-07. According to Mr. Green, a successful prototype would be the greatest gift he could give to Mr. Johnson. The news program showed Stark in a suit, his handsome face haggard. Amelia was by his side, both of them standing in front of a sapphire blue car, bathed in the glow of the media spotlight. Then they cut to the footage of the test itself. Nancy saw the unmanned blue car tear off around the racetrack in a cloud of dust. It hugged one bend after another, cleverly and smoothly avoiding obstacles. Nancy tried her best to control her emotions, but her body could not help but tremble. YR-07 was her project, one she started with the company's core technical team 4 years ago. Stark knew nothing about the Franklin Group's AI technical department. Nancy herself had managed this team, because Nancy's death 3 years ago caused the disbandment of the team. When she thought about how she had stayed up all night to revise various parameters, and how her team had worked so hard for this project, she felt pride and grief in equal measure. When she looked at Stark, who was receiving congratulations for her work from everyone on the screen, Nancy felt ready to explode with anger. I could kill him with my own 2 hands. Nancy's chest rose and fell as she clenched her fists. She dug her nails into her palm, drawing blood. Her desire for revenge was white-hot, all-encompassing. She needed to kill Stark Green. She needed to take him down for everything he'd done to her. "Thank you again," she murmured to Sophia. Nancy charged for the door. Just as she grabbed the doorknob, she heard someone laughing as he came down the stairs. "Leaving so soon? Don't you want to hang around and see if Steve will notice you after all?" Jonathan was dressed for the day in a black suit. The dark blue shirt he wore defined the gorgeous outline of his chest. The 2 top buttons on the shirt were open, revealing his slightly bronzed skin. Some men could wear clothes in a sexually aggressive manner, and Jonathan was one of them. His sharp, cold eyes locked onto Nancy as he came down to meet her. Thinking of the awkwardness in the bathroom, Nancy blushed. She carefully searched Maria's memories. Although Maria often came to the Davis family's mansion, she had only met Jonathan once before this. Jonathan was extremely handsome, but Maria was afraid of him. Nancy imagined the girl had good reason to be afraid. "Good morning," she erred on the side of caution. "Sorry, I can't stay for breakfast. Tell Steve goodbye for me if you see him." Jonathan said nothing else as she hurried out the door and practically ran down the block. Where was she going? And what was she going to do now? After the girl left, Jonathan walked to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee. Maria Miller rarely intrigued him, but there'd been something about her just now that seemed off. She looked angry, he murmured. I've never seen that kind of hate in her eyes before. Who are you talking to? Sophia called. Myself. It's a charming habit. If you say so, she scoffed. Poor Steve's never going to get away from that girl, it seems. You can't blame her for trying, Jonathan said. He looked over the newspaper, saw more details about Edward Johnson's death and the Franklin Group's prototype test. Terrible thing, what had happened to the Johnson family. When he thought of the Johnsons, his heart twisted in his chest. The memory of Nancy always did that to him. You need to put your damn feelings away, he thought to himself. Jonathan sighed and got ready to start his day. Nancy hurried down the street, away from the Davis mansion. She kept her head down, her thoughts so consumed by Stark and revenge, she barely noticed her surroundings. The sky above appeared dark and gloomy, so oppressive that it was almost suffocating. "How am I going to do this?" she muttered. "How am I going to kill him?" Since she wasn't paying any attention, Nancy stepped thoughtlessly into the street. Unfortunately, the cross sign wasn't illuminated yet. Cars stopped when she passed in front of them and honked their horns, startling her. "Sorry." She winced and waved to the angry drivers, attempting to reach the other sidewalk quickly. Then, to her horror, she watched almost in slow motion as the taxicab swerved around a stopped car and hurtled toward her. Nancy screamed, but the driver didn't appear to notice. The taxi sped towards her as Nancy put out one hand in shock. "I can't believe it," she thought in horror. "I just died, and now I'm going to die again." Just then, another car pulled forward out of nowhere and slid between Nancy and the speeding taxi. The cab driver, seeing a black town car that probably cost a fortune, decided it was more important than a human life and slammed hard on the brakes. The car almost collided, but just managed to avoid each other in a screech of tires. Meanwhile, Nancy collapsed to the ground. "I'm not dead," she gasped. The back seat door opened, and Jonathan Davis stuck his head outside. He glared at her. "How the hell are you already in trouble? You could have been killed," he snapped. Even though he was angry, his handsome face still possessed a look of total cool. Nancy got up from the ground and dusted herself off. "Thank you. You saved my life," she said. A small crowd of people were gathering around, recording the scenes on their phones and gossiping. Great. Just what she needed. "You don't have to thank me. Just try to look where you're going next time." He started to close the door, and Nancy couldn't help her irritation. "You aren't going to offer me a ride, are you?" "Should I?" He looked incredulous. "You're not bleeding, are you?" "I almost got run over by a cab. It's the least you could do." "The least I could do was help you not die. Anything else is a bonus." Jonathan sneered, annoyed as the cars around them began to honk. They wanted everyone to get a move on. "Stop holding up traffic, Maria. Don't you have class to attend?" "Yes, I do. I guess you ought to get to work." "That'd be a good idea, yes." With an angry noise, Nancy stomped back to the safety of the sidewalk. Jonathan rolled up the window, the engine roared, and his car sped away. "Jerk," Nancy sighed. To avoid more gawking onlookers, she rushed off until she was several blocks away. She slowed and stopped outside a coffee shop, determined to get more information. She took out Maria's phone and checked the news. The first report of her father's death had been a week ago. So, she'd been dead for 7 days. 7 days to die and come back to life in someone else's body. She grumbled. It's too weird. After all, what had happened to Maria Miller herself? Well, Nancy couldn't worry about that right now. Against all odds, she'd been given another chance. Better starting out in the body of a 20-year-old girl than as a newborn infant. She'd have to wait much, much longer to get revenge in that case. Nancy suppressed the complicated feelings in her heart and began to browse various news sites, hunting for more information. Even though Stark had provided her with a television during her captivity, he hadn't let her read newspapers or access the internet. As a result, she didn't know much about what had happened recently. As Nancy continued to read, she also gradually became clear about the current situation. The entirety of the Franklin Group was now under Stark's control. While the family company had expanded into a variety of industries over the years, the core business was still in technology. Recently, they had been paying even more attention to artificial intelligence. As for the Davis Group, they'd only started focusing on tech in recent years, and they were currently behind the Franklin Group in new developments. Nancy felt hope start to burn in her chest. As Maria, She had some access to the Davis family, and that meant access to the Davis group. If she wanted to go up against Stark, she needed a power base, and the Davises were big enough to take on the Franklin group. She would somehow use them to expose Stark's true colors and return to him the pain he'd inflicted on her family 1,000 times over. I'm coming for you, Stark. Your days are numbered. Nancy took the subway downtown and got out at the campus. Just as she was about to enter her class's building, Nancy's phone rang. The screen said, "Caller, Dad." And for a moment, Nancy's heart leapt for joy. Her father was still alive. But then, of course, she remembered that this was Maria's phone, and it was Maria's father, Chris, calling. With a sigh, Nancy picked up. Hi, Dad. She hated calling another man Dad.
Where the hell are you?
Chris snapped. He didn't seem like the world's most loving father. On my way to class. She was stunned by how rough he was speaking to her. Where are you?
Don't play cute with me, Maria. Are you still at the Davis house?
No, I just left. I have school, Dad. He swore.
Did you use the wine I gave you?
Nancy felt anger on Maria's behalf. You mean the wine you gave me to seduce Steve Davis with? Yeah, I drank it. It was lovely. Thanks for your generosity.
Don't play games with me. Did you screw him or not?
She wished she could punch this man in the face. No, sorry. Maybe I'll get around to it next time. She snapped.
What the hell's gotten into you, Maria?
Right. Maria was a dutiful daughter. Even though her father treated her like crap, Maria Miller was always ready to do whatever he asked. Nancy couldn't let her personality change too much too soon. Sorry, Dad. I'm really tired. My head hurts.
You're such a useless girl. Any bimbo could spread her legs for a rich guy, but my daughter's too dumb to manage even that.
I think I need to go to class. Nancy forced herself not to scream at the loathsome man.
What am I doing using you to climb the social ladder?
Chris continued.
I never should have let you break up with Tom Wright.
Nancy frowned. She didn't remember anyone by that name. Tom?
Yes, your ex-boyfriend. The rich one, don't you remember? You left him for pathetic reasons. I'd rather you hooked Steve Davis, but if Tom Wright's your one ticket to the good life, you ought to take it.
Nancy couldn't let him talk to her this way, even if she was playing a part. Dad, stop interfering in my life.
You little idiot. Why don't you listen to me? I'm doing this for your own good.
Chris snapped.
Tom Wright is one of the most eligible bachelors in New York City. He's come over to our house a dozen times since you broke it off to apologize. Why don't you forgive him? You should marry him.
Nancy took a deep breath. She had to play this strategically. Dad, the Davis family is way more powerful than the Wrights. Steve is a much better catch than Tom. Do you want me to give up on the superior offer so soon? Chris was stunned. Maybe Maria wasn't the logical type.
Did you get anything out of him? Even a damn kiss?
Nancy sneered. What a prick. No, but I'm making progress. His mother even asked me to stay for breakfast. That was mostly true. Sophia hadn't looked pleased, but she'd asked.
Really? The mother likes you. Then why didn't you say so earlier?
Chris sounded delighted. Because you only asked about the wine and why I didn't screw Steve. He likes me a lot.
Is that her?
A female voice whispered on Chris's end of the line. Maria's memory said that it was Selena, her stepmother. Chris had married the woman years ago, after his first wife, Maria's mom, had abandoned them.
Maria, things are going well with the Davies? With Steve?
Nancy rolled her eyes. Yes, things are fine.
Listen, I've heard around town that the Davis family is giving a party this weekend. If Steve really likes you, I think he'll definitely invite us.
Selena sounded excited.
Good idea, Lena. The Davises have got to invite us to this party.
Chris chuckled.
Maria, since you and Steve are getting along so well, I think should definitely score us an invite.
Nancy found Chris's lust for power sickening. I'll call Steve later and talk about sending an invitation your way.
Darling, we're so proud of you.
Selena cried. Nancy hung up without saying goodbye. She'd had more than enough of the Millers and went to class. The Millers had a point, though. If Nancy was setting on taking revenge, she would need the Davises, and Steve Davis might be her best way into that family. As she walked, Nancy thought about how to make Steve acknowledge her. Going to that party sounded like an important move. Nancy needed to take every opportunity she could. But how could she leverage her way into the party as his date? Then, one of Maria's memories of Steve came back crystal clear. Nancy stopped in her tracks and grinned. Oh, that is too good, she whispered. With that new tactic in her mind, she turned around and left the university building. Once outside, she picked up her phone and called Steve. It rolled over to voicemail. Annoying. So she called again, just to make sure. This time, success. He picked up the call. Hi, Steve. She made her voice as bright and flirtatious as possible. And Steve hung up on her. What a jerk. Huffing, Nancy texted. It's urgent. Please rise to the occasion and pick up the phone. A few seconds later, Nancy's phone rang. She smiled as she picked up. Steve.
What, Maria? What's so urgent?
Steve's voice was ice cold. He didn't seem happy to talk to her, to put it mildly. I think you can guess what I meant by my text. Otherwise, you wouldn't have called me back. There's a coffee shop across the street from your office. Meet me there in 15 minutes. Nancy hung up without waiting for a reply and hurried to make the appointment on time. Nancy got a table and ordered an iced coffee for herself. She was taking the first few sips when a shadow fell across her. She slowly raised her eyes and smiled. I didn't order anything for you. I didn't know what you like. I don't want coffee. Steve looked annoyed. He wasn't much older than she was, tall and straight-spined, with a handsome face. He didn't have the same magnetic aura as Jonathan, but he was more boyish and elegant-looking. Nancy wasn't sure why Maria had liked this guy so much. Maybe it was because she was young. Sit down, Steve. Let's talk business. Why are you hounding me? He sat opposite her. What's gotten into you? You seem weirder than usual. I'm dead, Steve. I was dead, and now I'm back. Nancy smiled at the thought. You asked what I want. Your family is having a party on Sunday. The richest and most powerful people in New York will be there. I want you to invite my parents. Now listen, he said, but she kept going. Furthermore, I want to attend as your girlfriend. Steve looked at Nancy with his mouth hanging open. Are you serious? Why the hell would I agree to that? Nancy sipped her coffee. The old Nancy would have felt bad about using a little blackmail. The new Nancy had no shame. She only wanted revenge. You saw the message I sent, didn't you, Steve? About rising to the occasion? Keep your voice down. His face went red. Imagine if New York high society learned that Steve Davis is impotent. She tisked. I don't know what they would think. Steve looked like he wanted to kill her. Nancy was unimpressed. She'd been killed by worse jerks than him already. Steve, I still have the texts from you on my phone. The angry little ones you sent about your dick didn't work? Remember those? If you don't get me what I want, those texts are going out to the paparazzi. Get the picture? Steve reached over and grabbed Nancy's wrist. She narrowed her eyes. Don't get cute, Steve. We're in a public place. This is no way to treat a lady. Realizing she was correct, Steve let her go. He frowned. The condition's temporary, he muttered, You know that. The doctor told me so. After that stupid car accident. I know, Steve. But I don't care. And neither will anyone else. You also know that the doctor said the problem was all in your head. Psychological issues are the toughest to heal. The slowest, too. You could be limp for a long time to come. What the hell's the matter with you? He hissed. Steve, we both know the truth. I don't love you, but I need to be your girlfriend. Date me for 12 months. And not only will I never bother you again, I won't tell anyone about your little problem. Do a good job, and you'll get a reward. Steve stared at her hatefully. Nancy truly didn't care. She was done being a good person. So, Steve, what do you say? Steve stood up. My secretary will contact you. I'll be waiting. Don't make me wait too long, Steve. He sneered. Fine. And then he strode away. We're on our way, Nancy whispered. With the Davis family as a shield, she could plan her attack on Stark and avoid Maria's ex-boyfriend, Tom. She'd remove herself from Chris's nefarious plotting for the time being. She couldn't be too excited. She needed to take her time. Currently, Stark had all the power and she had none. If she tried to kill him too fast, she'd only destroy herself. Furthermore, she planned to make Steve's year of sacrifice worthwhile. Nancy was going to join the Davis group and bring his company to the next level. And once Nancy made a name for herself in the Davis group, she would get Stark to hire her. That's when her revenge would truly begin. Nancy received a text from Steve's assistant. She had the party details, dress code, and family invitations. He works fast. She grinned, and then opened all of Maria's social media accounts. It was time to announce herself to the world. Becoming Steve Davis's girlfriend meant that Nancy lit up the internet like a firework. People posted articles about Steve's new girlfriend, Steve's private coffee date, and so on. Before too long, the tabloids had it. Steve Davis's new girlfriend is a brilliant young student from New York University named Maria Miller. With brains and charms to spare, Ms. Miller has come out of nowhere to land the city's hottest bachelor. When Nancy saw the news, she smiled. Chris had been thrilled. He was so delighted, he even sent her money to buy a new, beautiful dress for the party. Nancy naturally accepted the money. The next morning, Nancy went to the laboratory to finish the work she'd missed out on yesterday by chasing Steve. Even though Maria was not a top tech student, Nancy had no trouble following the engineering schematics that the team showed her. She was a brilliant scientist in her own right, after all. Halfway through the day, Nancy had to step out and go to the bathroom. When she left the restroom, she noticed someone hanging around in the corridor. The tall man leaned against the wall, with his back facing her. He seemed to be talking on the phone, and there was something familiar about him. As Nancy walked past, she caught his perfect side profile and stopped in shock. Jonathan? Indeed, it was none other than Jonathan Davis. As Nancy stopped to talk to him, her heeled shoe accidentally slipped on the tile floor. She pitched forward and grabbed for something to break her fall. She fell against Jonathan's tall, strong body and clutched to his sleeve. Nancy looked up into the man's indifferent and deep-set eyes. He just finished his call. You seem accident-prone when I'm around, Maria. Sorry. She let him go. I mean, I didn't do it on purpose. Jonathan narrowed his eyes and leaned forward, pressing Nancy against the wall. Her heart raced. His face was so close to her. Are you sure I'm not going to end up in the tabloids for this? Handsome Davis CEO saves nephew's girlfriend from fainting. That type of thing? I hope Steve's not annoyed by the publicity. Nancy narrowed her eyes. A girl does what she has to do. I thought you were nicer than that. Oh well. I suppose all social climbers are the same. She wanted to get away from this jerk. Did you come here to scold me? No, I'm here on business. And I want to warn you right now, don't use your so-called charms on me. I'm immune to that sort of thing. He pulled away from her. Maybe you ought to get back to work. Fine. She shoved past him. Maybe I should. Nancy wasn't going to let Jonathan get inside her head. She knew what she needed to do, and she was prepared to do whatever it took. Even if she had to blackmail and manipulate people like Steve Davis, she was going to get her revenge. There was something about that girl. Jonathan had never glanced twice at Maria Miller before, but now he found himself thinking about her. As he followed the laboratory head around the campus building, discussing the new tech that his family was paying for, Jonathan thought of Maria. She was beautiful, yes, but there'd been something in her eyes that he could have sworn looked familiar. Later, when the lab head brought Jonathan through to oversee the team as they worked, he caught sight of Maria again. She was engrossed in her work, so focused she didn't know he was watching. Maria kept her long hair in a ponytail, revealing a youthful face. The sunlight highlighted her against the window, bathing her in light. Her expression was serious and focused. It was so familiar that Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. It's impossible, he thought. Maria is so different when she is working. Somehow, she looks so much like her. The only woman Jonathan had ever loved, but Nancy Johnson had died years ago, and she certainly wasn't Maria Miller. It hurt to remember. Nancy, dead for 3 years, gone before he had the chance to express his feelings. Since her death, there had been no other woman. No one else had ever interested him. It didn't take long to finish up his business, and then Jonathan was happy to leave the campus behind him. He was determined to stop thinking about Maria, about the look in her eyes that reminded him so much of Nancy. On Sunday, Nancy received a delivery package containing a dress from Steve. If you're going to be my girlfriend, you might as well look the part, the note card said. What a charmer. At least the gown was lovely, a deep burgundy red with a scooped neckline and flowing skirt. Nancy slipped on the dress and twirled in the mirror, looking over herself. She was lucky that Maria had been beautiful. The girl in the mirror was only 20 years old, her delicate facial features without a single flaw. Her dark hair was sleek, her skin like cream, and her red lips were full. Her eyes gleamed like distant stars. With just a smile, she could make people want to give her the world. Thanks for loaning me your body, kid. Nancy smiled, very satisfied. As dusk fell, Steve texted to let her know a car was on the way. 10 minutes later, a sleek black limo pulled up to the curb. Nancy slid into the back seat and greeted Steve. He wore a sharp black suit that seemed to match his sharp, cold aura. He scowled as she closed the door. You look nice, he said as they drove. You know how to make a woman feel appreciated. But from the way his eyes trailed up and down her body, Nancy could tell that the compliment was genuine. Her cheeks heated with a blush. They drove through the park, headed for the mansion where the dinner would be held. They waited behind a line of luxury vehicles, itching to be let out in front of the party. The moment Nancy got out of the car, she felt everyone's focus land upon her. She was Steve Davis's official girlfriend, after all, and even she knew how good she looked. The burgundy of her gown made her coloring deep and rich, and her face was as regal as one might find in a painted masterpiece. Nancy slipped her arm through Steve's, and the two of them allowed people to stare and gossip as they calmly walked into the mansion's receiving hall. As they entered the party, Nancy heard gossiping whispers. Is that Steve's girlfriend? She's even better looking than the photos in the newspaper. Even if she doesn't come from money, a knockout like that deserves to be rich. It seems like Steve has found a real diamond. Are you all right? Steve whispered. You're digging into my arm. Sorry. Nancy relaxed her grip. I'm just nervous. I don't like everyone staring at me. Yes, that's why you leaked our relationship to every gossip sheet in town. Steve rolled his eyes. I know what it takes to survive in this city. I'm just not comfortable in the spotlight, that's all. Maybe Steve didn't believe her, but it was true. Nancy had attended plenty of charity events and parties back in her old life, but she'd never been the social butterfly. Having to stand out and draw attention to herself wasn't natural. She wanted to groan as they sailed past Chris, who had just arrived at the mansion. He grinned at his daughter like a shark. He was undoubtedly thrilled to be watching Maria make such a conquest of society. Don't let your father talk to me, Steve said. I know he's your family, but he's clingy. My father's a terrible man, Nancy said. Chris wasn't her father, not really, and she felt no loyalty. But I need to keep him from annoying me too often. Steve looked genuinely surprised. I didn't realize you were such a cynic. I'm not a cynic. I just understand how the world works. Steve spoke with politicians and business colleagues who came over to chat and half-heartedly introduced Nancy to them. She scanned the crowd as Steve spoke until she noticed a man slowly walking over toward her. Jonathan wore an elegant dark suit that seemed to have been molded to his body. His eyes pierced her as he prowled closer. The moment he appeared, all eyes were fixed on him. Nancy knew everyone here wanted his time and attention. He was so powerful that no one in this house could match him. However, everyone knew it was too risky to greet him casually. When he passed by Nancy, his gaze swept across her face. He seemed to convey some deep meaning with that look, and Nancy was startled. What's wrong? Steve asked. Nothing. I thought Jonathan looked at me funny. You think every man here's in love with you, huh? She smirked. That sounded jealous. Hardly. Steve pointed to a sofa. I have to meet with the mayor. It's private business. I'll come get you when it's over. Yes, little girls like me would never know what to say to the mayor. Nancy rolled her eyes. Steve grumbled something and left. Nancy took a seat and grabbed a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. If she was going to do this, she was going to have some fun. She listened to the gossip around her and then shivered when she heard a low, familiar voice. I've looked over the semantics of your project, Jonathan said. He was talking to a nervous-looking man. It's too radical for my taste. We can't go disrupting a sector that employs so many people. Not before we better understand what the evolution would be. But John, who cares about those nobodies? The guy complained. Just give my company a chance. Nancy smiled when she heard Jonathan tell the guy to do something unseemly with himself. Jonathan left his colleague and walked straight to the sofa. When he started to sit down, he realized Nancy was already there. You. He narrowed his eyes. I can't get away from you, it seems. Most men would count themselves lucky. I think we both know I'm not most men. But he sat down next to her anyway, his eyes flickering over her once from head to toe. That's a nice dress. Steve gave it to me. His lip curled. Well, my nephew has good taste. In dresses. His light insult toward her wasn't easy to ignore. Nancy put down her champagne with a scowl. He certainly has more charm than other members of his family. She stood up, prepared to walk away. I'm glad to hear you say that. My nephew's important to me. Jonathan said. The thing is, I don't believe he's that important to you. What do you mean? She felt chilled by Jonathan's murderous look. He stood and leaned close to her ear, whispering his next words. I think you're learning to play the game, Maria. You used to be a shy little thing, and now you've grown up, almost overnight. I think that makes you dangerous to my family. He sneered. I think you're after my nephew's money and connections, and I won't let you walk all over him. Understood? Her throat was dry. Understood, Nancy whispered. She refused to cower before this man, even if he was frightening. Good, because you ought to know that I take protecting my family very seriously. And I'm not afraid to play dirty to keep them safe. Be sure to remember that. Nancy could feel the danger she was in. She'd had enough of being threatened by men for 2 lifetimes. I understand you, Jonathan. You're threatening the wrong girl. Steve has nothing to fear from me. Time will tell. Yes, it will. So that means give me a chance. Besides, shouldn't you be tending to your own relationships? The future Mrs. Jonathan Davis isn't going to simply fall out of the sky. Almost 30 and still unmarried? Nancy tisked. That's not very responsible, is it? Maybe I ought to put myself on display then. Jonathan put out his hand for hers. What do you say? Let's dance. It was a surprising offer, but one Nancy knew she couldn't refuse. Fine, but don't get too bossy. She took his hand. I like to lead whenever I can. I'm afraid that's not okay with me. He masterfully pulled her onto the dance floor after him. I always like to be in control. She was starting to learn that all too well. As they danced, she felt the room appraising them and heard jealous whispers from the other women. Who is that girl? She gets all the luck. Hey, isn't that Steve's girlfriend? I guess the Davises believe in sharing everything with each other. Oh, I wish Jonathan would dance with me. Nancy tuned them all out. She simply followed Jonathan's guidance, easily matching her steps with his. It had been years since she danced, and it felt wonderful to be light on her feet again. Jonathan was tall and strong, and he held Nancy with perfect ease. As he spun Nancy around, she felt like she was made of air. The whole crowd was staring by now. I didn't expect you to dance so well, Jonathan murmured. He seemed annoyed. You just wanted to humiliate me in front of New York? What a wonderful man. You know all the steps to every dance. So do you. Yes, after years of dance lessons. I didn't think a middle-class girl from nowhere would have had all that training. There's much you don't know about me. Nancy hoped he couldn't see through her. You'd better get used to being surprised. I don't like surprises. Then I'll just tell you all my many accomplishments. Nancy performed a twirl with ease, annoying Jonathan even more. I speak 3 languages. I play piano and the violin. I'm an accomplished oil portraitist and chess player. Does any of that blow your mind? It's surprising. You're right. He growled. I'm not sure where you learned all that. As a member of the Johnson family, Nancy had been raised to have as many cultivated talents as possible. The thought of her family made her a bit heartsick. The music came to a stop, and the dancers halted as well. Jonathan pulled Nancy into a deep dip, trying one last time to unbalance her. But she went into the dip with expert ease. All around them, the crowd applauded wildly. Thank you for the dance. Nancy stood, but I need to go powder my nose. She went to the bathroom. As she was about to walk out of the stall, she heard some women talking about her. Have you guys heard about Maria's family? Her father's trying to sell her to the highest bidder, apparently. I wonder how much cash someone needs to spend to buy Maria. Do you think that the Davis family is just toying with her? When Steve gets bored of Maria, she'll be thrown away like trash. Now not only has she seduced Steve, but she's also captured Jonathan's attention. I've never seen him dance with anyone before. Let's place bets on how long it takes Steve to dump that shameless woman. I'm betting a month. It figured. When people became jealous, they went from odd to ugly very quickly. Nancy calmly exited the stall and went to wash her hands. The 3 women looked embarrassed. Can I take a bet? Nancy asked. The 3 girls were stunned. I bet 1 year, and I'll be the one to dump Steve. She left them gaping and stammering and walked back to the party. Those gossips shouldn't have gotten to her, but they wounded her to the core. People in this city were always actively rooting for one another to fail. I got what I came for tonight. I showed myself off to everyone and got tongues wagging. Now I just want to go home and go to sleep. Jonathan was gone when she re-entered the party. She marched up to Steve, still talking with the mayor, and butted in. "Sweetheart, I'm headed out. This party's too dull." Nancy relished seeing how uncomfortable she made Steve. "You ought to wait for me to take you home." He glared at her. "I'm afraid I have a headache. I'll find my own way out. Ta!" She kissed his cheek and sauntered away. The night was pitch black, the moon covered by clouds. Nancy was pulling out her phone to call a cab when she heard a rough, familiar voice nearby. "What else did Stark mention?" Jonathan asked. It sounded like he was on the phone. At mention of Stark's name, Nancy's stomach clenched like a fist. She paused, straining to catch what else Jonathan said. "Then say my answer is no." Jonathan sounded irritated. "No? No to what?" Nancy tried to listen harder, but he lowered his voice for the last of the call and hung up soon after. "Who's there?" Jonathan asked. He walked towards, his face ice pale and perfectly cruel, looking into the light as the moon broke from the clouds. You seem to be everywhere I am these days. Following me now?" He sounded angry with her for some reason. "I didn't know you were here. Maybe you're the one following me." "Is that a fact?" Jonathan came at her fast and pressed Nancy against the wall. "Didn't I tell you it was dangerous to play games with me? Are you spying on my business calls now?" "I was leaving. That's all." "Why did you come here?" he whispered. Nancy shook her head, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. To her shock, Jonathan grabbed her chin, forcing her to raise her head. Instantly, their lips were only a finger width of distance apart. Jonathan spoke in a romantic tone, but the words were cold. "Don't lie to me. Tell me the truth." "I have no reason to lie," Nancy said, but Jonathan wouldn't release her. Pressed to the man's firm chest, Nancy felt an inexplicable flutter throughout her body. Even though she'd been engaged once, she'd never been in a really solid relationship. Her affection for Stark had been platonic until he betrayed her and made her hate him. They'd barely kissed and never had sex, so having Jonathan so near, feeling her whole body burn from his presence, made her feel uprooted. Nancy hated that sensation. "The truth?" she whispered. "The truth is I don't want to be manhandled by anyone ever again, especially not you." She pushed him hard, but didn't budge him. "You stopped to listen to me, Maria. I heard your footsteps slow down. Why? What are you planning?" In order to get out of this, she needed to give him a little bit of the truth. "Fine. I heard the name Stark and I was curious." She played dumb. "Did you mean Stark Green, the Franklin Group CEO?" He said nothing, so she continued. "You know I'm studying AI. The Franklin Group just launched the unmanned car. I'm looking for a job after graduation." They both froze as they heard footsteps on the path. Nancy tried to get out of Jonathan's grip, but he held her tighter. She began to panic. If they were seen, there'd be horrible gossip. "Just imagine if someone were to see me with my nephew's girlfriend," Jonathan said. His voice was wicked with suggestion. "Can you imagine what they'd say? The tabloids would have fun with that little story, wouldn't they?" He snorted. "Is that why you're trembling? You're afraid your one-way ticket into the Davis family is about to get torn up, right?" She stared into Jonathan's eyes. "You want to get rid of me that badly?" "Yes." Jonathan brought their mouths close, about to forcefully kiss her at the moment someone appeared. Nancy held her breath, burning to feel his lips, hating him at the same time. The footsteps drew closer. In less than half a minute, that person would turn the corner and see everything. A chill spread through her body. If anyone saw them, this thing with Steve would be over. Then Chris would force her to marry her ex-boyfriend. She wouldn't be dead, but it would be worse than death. A life imprisoned, no chance of revenge. Jonathan could destroy her so easily. She hated powerful men like him, like Stark. "Jonathan, don't do this to me." She fought tears. He appeared surprised and released her. Nancy stepped back with gratitude. "Your eyes." His voice sounded hoarse. "Something in them. They reminded me of someone else." She didn't dare ask who. She was just grateful to have been spared. They heard the footsteps and voices passing by them. It was all right. Nancy was safe now. It was fine if they found her. Jonathan scowled and turned away. "Don't ever spy on me again," he snapped. "Have you read Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom?" Nancy asked. She wasn't sure what possessed her. Jonathan turned as she quoted from the book. "We can be as humble as the dust, but we cannot be twisted like maggots. If the sky is not bright, then live in the darkness. If making a sound is dangerous, then keep silent. If you think you can't light up, then curl up in the corner. But don't get used to the darkness. Defend the darkness. Don't be proud of your cowardice. Don't mock those who are braver than you. We can be humble like a dust, but we cannot be twisted like maggots." "Who are you?" He stepped toward her, incredulous. "This can't be all a coincidence." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Years ago, another girl asked if I'd read that book. She gave me that exact same quote." In a flash, Nancy realized he was correct. She, Nancy Johnson, had said something similar to Jonathan years back, at a party, when she was still alive and unharmed. "I know I'm safe with you, John," she told him. "I know you would never hurt me. You don't have it in you to be cruel like that." Then she, Nancy, had given that same quote. She could have cursed her own stupidity. Someone else quoted that? What a coincidence," she mumbled. "It must be. It's gotta be a coincidence. It can't be anything else." He shook his head, still staring at her like she was a mystery. The group's footsteps drew nearer to the pair of them, and now Nancy could hear Steve's voice laughing along with some other people. She wished Jonathan would leave, but he remained stubbornly fixated on her. "But there's still something about you," he said. "Something about that look in your eyes that reminds me so strongly of her." The air was tense as Steve approached with a group of his nieces and nephews. Sophia was nowhere to be seen, making Jonathan's previous intent to intimidate Nancy a little less dangerous. Steve called out, "Hey, Uncle." Before he could respond, Nancy cut in. "Jonathan was just leaving." Jonathan scowled. After all that, how could she be so bold? He spoke to Steve, but looked directly at Nancy. "I need to make a call. Don't let her run around unattended next time." Jonathan stormed off, and Nancy approached Steve with a broad smile, as if nothing had happened. One of his nieces, a 10-year-old named Katie, looked Nancy up and down. "Is she your girlfriend?" At Katie's question, Steve's lips twisted into a sardonic smile. "She's something, all right. Take it from me, you better watch out for her." One of the younger kids popped out from behind Steve's legs. "Is she like that bad witch in Snow White?" Steve chuckled, but offered no answer, causing the kids to look fearfully at Nancy before scampering away. One brave soul returned and grabbed Steve's arm. "Why aren't you running? She eats people." Nancy leaned in with a sinister smile. "Did you know I love to eat little boys' hearts the most?" The children went ashen and ran back into the house. Nancy laughed to herself, and Steve eyed her angrily. "What did you say to Jonathan?" he asked. Nancy smiled coyly. "You really want to know?" She leaned forward, took his face in one hand, and whispered in his ear, "That I suddenly found him impossibly handsome and wanted to dump you to chase after him." Steve snatched her wrist and stepped back, his eyes filled with hate. "You really have no shame, do you? Have you already forgotten our little agreement? Nancy knew Steve was only 3 years younger than Jonathan, but his inferiority complex oozed from every pore. Of course I remember. Don't worry, I won't go after him until next year. Nancy winked, yanked her wrist from his grasp, and marched off. When she was finally out of sight, she leaned against the wall and let out a deep sigh. She was playing a dangerous game, but if she wanted to swim with the sharks, she knew she'd have to become one herself. After a long weekend working in the lab at school, Nancy's professor sent her to meet with an eccentric tech founder at a horse track on Long Island. Maria had never been to this part of the city before, so her memories were no help. And when Nancy entered a tunnel that she thought would take her to the grandstand, she suddenly found herself directly on the racetrack. Hooves thundered all around her, and a thick layer of dust hung in the air. But just as she was about to flee back to the tunnel, she froze. At the far end of the track, a rider was coming around the bend toward Nancy. She wore a bright red racing suit and had long, elegant features. It was her. It was Amelia Renner. Nancy wanted to run, but she was paralyzed by the sight of the woman who had tortured her and burned her alive. As Amelia's horse charged down the track toward Nancy, her mind raced. If she was going to die again, it could not be at the hands of that monster. But her legs refused to budge. The horse barreled down on her, and Nancy squeezed her eyes shut, praying for a miracle. Just then, a powerful arm reached down and flung Nancy into the air, setting her gracefully on the back of another horse. Her eyes shot open, and she looked on in shock as the horse threw Amelia off, and she hit the ground with a sickening crunch. As Nancy tried to process what had just happened, a low voice sounded in her ear. "One of these days, I'm not going to be around to save you." Nancy whipped around, and her jaw dropped. It was Jonathan. His sun-kissed skin glinted with beads of sweat, and atop a horse he looked like some kind of Greek god. She blushed, and her heart pounded. "I can't believe I was... and you just... thank you." Jonathan gripped her tightly by the waist, and she could feel the heat coming off his chest. Amelia's screams filled the air, and Nancy couldn't help but smile at her suffering. Jonathan cocked his head in surprise. "Enjoying the show?" She had it coming. Nancy shrugged, and Jonathan let out a shocked laugh. "You're hardly the one to judge," she snapped. "I've seen the way you treat people." Jonathan sat up straight, and Nancy could feel his abs tighten. His tone was suddenly cold and direct again. "What are you doing here anyway?" "I'm supposed to meet some tech entrepreneur named Louis Cross, but I have no idea what he looks like." "It just so happens I know him well." Jonathan paused, and Nancy looked back in frustration. "Then what are we waiting for?" "What's in it for me?" Jonathan's dark, piercing eyes stared straight into hers. Nancy wanted to hit him right on his smug face, but she couldn't risk losing access to the Davis family. She had to remember she was a 20-year-old nobody now. She pasted on a smile and tossed her hair. "The pleasure of my company, of course." Jonathan snorted. "Hold on tight then. I don't want to have to save you twice in one day." Nancy turned forward, and Jonathan kicked the horse into motion. As they cantered down the verdant path from the tracks to the stables, she closed her eyes. The cool breeze kissed her face, and she leaned ever so slightly back to feel the strong chest of the man behind her. For the next few weeks, Nancy was utterly consumed by school. She was nearing the end of her bioengineering course at NYU Hospital, and the grueling final experiments had made sleep an unaffordable luxury. After one very late night, she decided to take the fast way back to her dorm, down the long alley behind the hospital. But as she stepped off the sidewalk and into the darkness, she was too dazed to notice the pair of men that followed her. Across the street, Jonathan sat impatiently in the back of a black SUV. The door opened, and his assistant, Jack Jones, handed him a file. "Here's this month's test results, sir." Jonathan took it and flipped it open. He'd become accustomed to reading his own medical charts years earlier. This one was no different. Every test was negative, He was a specimen of good health. Jonathan shut the file, but he didn't seem relieved. That was because no amount of test results could quell his fear that he only had 2 years to live. There were originally 6 siblings in Jonathan's generation of the Davis family, 4 men and 2 women. The 2 women were the oldest and continued to live happy and healthy lives with families of their own. But of the 4 men, only Jonathan was still alive. Stranger yet, all 3 of his brothers died at the age of 32, and all from supposedly natural causes. After his last remaining brother died 5 years earlier, Jonathan had seen every doctor, taken every test, and once, in secret, even consulted a psychic. He still swore he didn't believe that his generation was cursed, but he insisted on getting a full-body scan once a month. He set the file down and stepped out of the car to get some air, but his attention was pulled toward the alley. The lights were dim, but he saw what looked like a group of men surrounding a young woman. Jack noticed it too and pulled out his phone. "I'll call the police. No sense getting shot up over a stranger." As Jack held the phone to his ear, Jonathan took a step forward, straining to hear the muffled screams coming from the alley. Suddenly, he put a hand up to Jack. "Stop. I know that voice. It's Maria." "Steve's girlfriend? Are you sure?" The question made Jonathan's heart sink, but when he turned to Jack, his mouth was drawn tight and his eyes burned with passion. "I'm positive." Cornered and outnumbered in the dark alley, Nancy fought with all her might. Her wrist was seized by one of the thugs, but as she twisted her head to sink her teeth into his hand, he pushed her away and delivered a brutal kick to her stomach. Overwhelmed by pain, she lost her balance and crumbled to the ground. The thugs laughed maliciously as they closed in around her, pinning her down. Nancy thought of the dagger she kept hidden in her boot, but she couldn't free a hand to reach it. The pain in her abdomen throbbed, and she broke out into a cold sweat, her body too weak to fight. Still, her eyes blazed with determination as she shouted, "Who sent you here?" The leader sneered. "You crossed the wrong person, sweetheart, and now I'm thinking I might teach you a lesson before we take you back to our boss." His eyes wild and luxurious, the leader released her leg and reached for his belt. Seizing her chance, Nancy jerked her other leg free and delivered a crushing blow to his crotch. His shouts of agony caused the others to momentarily loosen their grip, giving Nancy just enough time to grab her dagger and press it to her own throat. With bloodshot eyes, she glared at her attackers. "Your boss wanted me alive? Well, if I die, you'll have to outrun him and the cops." Hesitation flickered across their faces. As they backed away, Nancy sprang forward and buried her dagger into the chest of the nearest thug. He howled in pain as she twisted the knife. Blood gushed from the wound as she yanked it free and let his limp body fall to the ground with a thud. "Who else wants a piece of me?" Madness gleamed in her eyes. She fought too hard for this second chance at life, and with her family's vengeance unfulfilled, she was going to beat these men or die trying. One of them finally cracked and turned to run. "She's insane. Let's get out of here." The rest of them scrambled after him, but they only took a few steps before 2 mysterious figures blocked their path. "Who the hell are you?" the leader demanded, but the only response he received was a sound of a fist slicing through the air. His nose broke with a visceral crack, and blood poured from his face. Before he could even cry out in pain, another fist pummeled him in the gut and drove the air from his lungs. A few feet away, Nancy clutched her abdomen and fell to her knees. Her vision wavered, and before she could make out the faces of her rescuers, she crumbled to the ground. Jonathan and Jack made quick work of the others, and as Jonathan knocked out the last one with a devastating blow, he looked up and saw Nancy collapse. He sprang to her side and barked orders at Jack. "Leave one alive, find out who's behind this, and clean up the mess." "Yes, sir," Jack replied, his knee pressed down on the thug's back. He pulled out his phone and got through on the first ring. "Norman, get the cleaners and bring them down to the hospital." The criminal groaned, so Jack grabbed his head and smashed it into the pavement. We've got a few things to tidy up." Nancy's body radiated with pain, and heat coursed through her veins. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. Suddenly, she saw a pair of polished wingtips and a tall, imposing figure above them. The light of the moon behind him made it impossible to discern his expression, but as he lifted Nancy off the ground, his warm scent filled her nostrils, and she knew she was safe. Jack raised an eyebrow at Jonathan's tenderness, but quickly opened the car door for them. Jonathan sent Nancy inside, and his gaze fell on the bloody dagger clutched in her hand. He glanced back at the dead man in the alley and was struck by her determination and ruthlessness. Could this really be the same girl who had been chasing Steve all these years? Jonathan carefully took the dagger and wiped her blood-stained hands. "Astoria Hotel," he said, climbing in next to her. As Jonathan's car merged onto the West Side Highway, Nancy stirred and put her head on his shoulder. Her voice was weak, and her face was flushed. "You saved me." He leaned in close, his breath tickling her ear as he asked, "How many is that now? Maybe this time you should show your gratitude in a more special way." The heat of his breath was overwhelming. Her heart pounded in her ears. She moaned as she tore open her tattered shirt and felt the cool air on her skin. Jonathan raised the divider between the front and back seats. He took her head in his hands. "Do you know what you're doing, Maria?" Their lips gazed each other's, and Jonathan's blood rushed as she touched his chest and lowered her head onto his lap. "Is she toying with me?" he wondered. He turned her head to meet his gaze, but her eyes were shut, and her body seemed to be on fire. She was unconscious. Jonathan punched the microphone. "Call Dr. Moore and tell him to meet us at the Astoria, and step on it." Nancy jolted awake 2 days later, feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. A sharp pain lingered in her abdomen, but a plush blanket enveloped her like a cloud. As her eyes adjusted, she realized she was in the presidential suite of a luxury hotel. Gold fixtures dotted the walls, and the king-size bed was encased in a velvet frame. Had she died and been reborn again? Maria could never afford this. Her memory rushed back in fragments. The sinister faces of the thugs encircling her, a blood-stained dagger, a pair of bespoke leather shoes, the feeling of weightlessness as she was lifted off the ground, and that unbearable heat before it all went dark. So she hadn't died. She had been rescued, and whoever did it must have brought her here. She looked around the room as she waded through the fog in her mind. The bedroom was empty except for her, but she heard the faint tap, tap, tap of someone typing in the next room. Inhaling deeply, Nancy lifted the blanket and saw she was wearing a loose hotel robe with nothing underneath it. Her heart leapt into her throat. How did she get into these clothes? And who put them on her? She dug through her memories, desperately trying to recall how she got here. As she stirred, the typing sound stopped, and the door to her room opened. She yanked the blanket back over her nearly naked body, and when she looked up to see who it was, her jaw dropped. It was Jonathan. He was impeccably dressed in a shirt and tie, and the interplay of light and shadow on his chiseled face made him look like a painting by Rembrandt or Monet. Nancy wanted to thank him, to ask him what happened and how she got here, but her eyes suddenly darted to a dried blood stain on the bed. It was inches from her waist. She thought of the loose robe and no underwear, and her face went pale with shock. Had she escaped that horror in the alleyway, only to find herself back in it here? Still in the doorway, Jonathan noticed her sudden change in demeanor and followed her gaze. He chuckled to himself and finally strode to her bedside. As he approached, Nancy gripped the bedsheets tightly, and her voice quivered with fear and rage. "What did you do?" His eyes flickered with mischief. He leaned in, and she retreated further beneath the blankets. "You've been asleep for 2 days. You'll have to be more specific." Nancy shot him a seething glare. "You know what I'm talking about." "I do, but do you?" Nancy fumed. I should have known that the all-powerful Jonathan Davis was just a disgusting pig in a fancy suit. Jonathan kept smiling. Well, someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I'm your nephew's girlfriend, for God's sake. Are you really Steve's girlfriend? Because we both know that you're not doing that with him. Nancy's eyes burned with hatred. He respects me. Does he? I love my nephew, but not even a woman as beautiful as you could fix his little problem, which makes me wonder why he'd let you be his girlfriend in the first place. Nancy bit her lip. He was dangerously close to the truth, and all she wanted was to get away from him. Noticing her change in expression, Jonathan drew even closer, his body pressed against hers. His low voice whispered seductively, "What do you think would happen if Steve saw his girlfriend in my bed?" Nancy narrowed her eyes and steadied her voice. If you really wanted to get rid of me, you would have just called him to see for himself. So what do you really want? Jonathan's mouth turned up into a wicked grin. His palms slid across her body, sending shivers down her spine. That's easy. I want you to be my girlfriend, and my nephew never needs to know about it. I will never be your girlfriend. She spat the words at him with disgust. He gripped her waist tightly and stared right into her eyes. After a moment of tense silence, he shrugged. Too bad. I guess I'll just call Steve then. Jonathan stood and pulled out his phone. Nancy leapt to her feet, barely matching Jonathan's height as she stood on the bed. You're a monster! A shameless monster! She lunged for his phone, but suddenly stopped. Something had landed on her arm. She looked down and saw a glistening drop of blood, then another land right next to it. Nancy reached up to her face and found a thick stream of blood running from her nose. Her eyes went to the dried blood on the bed, then to Jonathan's smug grin. He held up his phone to show he hadn't actually called Steve. I think you left off at shameless monster? Or was it disgusting pig in a fancy suit? Nancy's face flushed, and she shoved Jonathan, smearing blood on his crisp white shirt. How could you let me think that? Jonathan's eyes darkened. Because you always assume the worst of me. Nancy's fist clenched as her anger threatened to overwhelm her. Each breath came out ragged and heavy, and her chest heaved with the effort to regain control. Her usual calm and rationality had abandoned her, but she refused to give Jonathan the upper hand. With a deep inhale, she lifted her gaze to meet his. I'm sorry. Thank you for saving me. Jonathan studied her for a moment, and a teasing smile played at the corners of his mouth. All right, let's talk about what happened. His gaze drifted down to Nancy's small, bare feet. Her toes were curled up tightly, in a clear indication of her lingering anxiety. Jonathan couldn't help but find it endearing. You want to know who's responsible? Nancy nodded. Do you know them? Jonathan's eyes flashed with guilt, but he had never been one to apologize. I do. You were attacked because of me. One of the girls at the party has been chasing me for 4 years, and when she saw us dancing, she got jealous and paid someone to take you out. Relief washed over Nancy, but she didn't show it. At least they weren't part of Stark's gang. Don't worry, Jonathan continued. They won't bother you again. I took care of everyone, including the ones pulling the strings. He pulled her in, his strong arms wrapped tightly around her waist. Only the dead can't hurt you, Maria. But of course you know that, don't you? Nancy locked eyes with him, and a terrible realization washed over her. Oh my God, I thought that was just a dream. Jonathan lowered his head and whispered menacingly into Nancy's ear. You murdered a man 2 nights ago, drove a dagger into his chest and twisted it. His warm breath gave her goosebumps. You left quite a mess for me to clean up when you fainted. Suddenly, Nancy's mind raced. She squirmed in his grasp. What about the surveillance cameras? What about their phones? What about the blood? Every camera from the hospital entrance to the scene was destroyed, as was the evidence. Jonathan locked eyes with her, his gaze unyielding. You can relax. Nobody will come after you, including the police. Nancy was struck by his ruthless efficiency. She swallowed hard. Why did you help me? I don't object to using violence to solve problems, but I hate underhanded tactics. Besides, it started because of me. It was only right that I took care of it. Nancy had been through too much in the last 48 hours to deal with this man's cold-blooded teasing. But it was that same cold-bloodedness that made her believe what he was saying. Thank you, she said. I wish I could repay you, but I promise I'll remember what you did for me. Jonathan was surprised by her sincerity. His eyes lingered on her face, and he recalled her fierce determination and icy composure 2 nights earlier. She often seemed mature beyond her years, but this morning had revealed a different side of her. Defensive, vulnerable, self-conscious. He had dug up every piece of information there was on Maria Miller and found nothing of note. Certainly no connection to the girl he had loved so many years ago. He tried to remind himself it was a coincidence, but he couldn't deny that she intrigued him. I'm sure we can think of a way for you to repay me that doesn't involve money. His voice was firm but gentle as he pulled Nancy close again. Startled, her hand shot up and pressed against his broad chest. He grinned wickedly and teased. That's a good start. Nancy bristled. If I'm your nephew's girlfriend, doesn't that sort of make you my uncle? I think I'd remember if I had a niece like you. Besides, you and Steve are just putting on a show, and not even a very good one. Why should I have to play along? Nancy faltered. Did he actually know she was using Steve? Or was he just toying with her again? Jonathan leaned in, and his lips brushed her earlobe. I like to take matters into my own hands, just like you did in that alley. Nancy pushed him away, but stopped when she saw the genuine admiration in his eyes. She hated that it gave her butterflies. Jonathan held her gaze. We're not so different, you and I. But just as she was about to protest, there was a knock at the door. Jonathan released her, and his expression returned to cold indifference. That's the breakfast and clothes I asked them to send up. Get dressed and we'll eat. As the two shared their first meal, Nancy was overcome by the strange sensation that they were living together. When they finished eating, they left the hotel and went their separate ways without saying another word. Soon after Nancy arrived back at her dorm, she overheard a group of girls talking about Steve's upcoming birthday party, a highly publicized event involving his personal yacht and his family's private island near the Hamptons. It occurred to Nancy that Steve hadn't invited her yet, and if she wasn't there, it could destroy everything she'd worked for. She quickly texted him. Stevie, baby, I think my birthday invitation got lost in the mail. His reply was tense and immediate. I'll send a car Saturday morning. Look nice and don't embarrass me. When Nancy finally got back to her room, she turned on her computer and pulled up a program she'd written to hack into social media accounts. But her target wasn't someone else's. It was her own. Ever since her rebirth, Nancy had been looking for information on her best friend, the famous fashion designer Esther Williams. According to the internet, the last anyone had seen of her was 2 years earlier when she went to a remote village to teach and never came back. Nancy knew Stark had monitored all of her accounts when he had her locked up, so in order to evade detection, she hacked into 24 random accounts in addition to her own. Once she was in, Nancy found her chat logs with Esther. As she read the first message, her hands trembled, and the mouse nearly fell from her grasp. Nancy, tell me you're still alive. That corpse they pulled out of the water wasn't you, right? Each day, more messages appeared, revealing Esther's growing suspicion about Stark and determination to find Nancy. 2 years after Nancy's supposed death, Esther's last message was an audio recording. Nancy, I'm in Alaska. I'm scared. The rest of her words were lost to the howling wind. Nancy's heart ached, and she sobbed into her blanket. Her worst fears had come true. Esther had tried to find her, only to be discovered by Stark and chased into hiding. Or worse. Nancy couldn't help but feel responsible, and she swore in that moment that no matter what it took, she would find her best friend if she was still alive, and kill anyone who got in her way. Shirt were undone. Less than 30 minutes later, there was a knock on Stark's office door. His assistant entered, looking uneasy. Stark leaned forward. "What is it?" "Nancy's social media has been hacked, sir. It's been dormant for a year, but earlier tonight it was breached by an IP address in New York and sent dozens of spam messages. From the looks of it, it's a run-of-the-mill phishing scam." Stark's pulse quickened at the mention of Nancy's name, but he stayed calm. "Get someone to investigate and compile a list of everyone her account contacted. I want it within the hour." As his assistant hurried out, Stark took a sip of water. His hand shook slightly, and he muttered aloud, "This better be a coincidence, Nancy." In the days that followed, a dark cloud seemed to descend upon Nancy. Her friends noticed her growing increasingly withdrawn, but when they inquired about her well-being, she would flash a tight smile and utter, "I'm fine." Behind her stoic facade, however, she was consumed with the search for information about Esther. That morning, Nancy had contacted Esther's mother, pretending to be an old classmate of Esther's. Her mother told her everything she knew, but it hadn't gotten her any closer to learning if her best friend was alive or dead. After all, 2 long years had passed since Esther's disappearance, and any remaining clues had undoubtedly been covered up by Stark. As much as she wished she could take him on directly, she knew Maria wasn't powerful enough yet. On the morning of Steve's birthday, his assistant Travis picked Nancy up at her dorm and escorted her to the Davis yacht. As they drove, she realized she'd accidentally worn the white dress that Jonathan had given her a week earlier in the hotel room. She got lost thinking about that morning, and a pit formed in her stomach when she imagined what Jonathan would think if he recognized it on her. "We're here. Watch your step on the gangway." Travis spoke with her with the same ambivalence that Steve did. Nancy nodded as she exited the car and gingerly stepped onto the wooden plank that led to the ship. The sea rolled around her, its waves more turbulent than she expected. Suddenly, a violent lurch caused her to stop in her tracks halfway up the ramp. Gripping the handrail with her white knuckles, Nancy was flooded by memories of the 3 years she spent as Stark's prisoner, chained up in the bowels of his yacht. "Let's go. Steve is waiting for you inside." Travis seemed not to notice her distress. Her legs had turned to lead, but she mustered the strength to calm herself. She drew in a deep, steadying breath and fixed her gaze on the horizon. Just then, Jonathan's tall, imposing figure emerged from the shadows, slowly advancing toward Nancy. He was dressed in black pants and a fitted gray polo, a stark contrast to his usual attire, and every inch of it accentuated his muscular form. The top buttons of his shirt were undone, revealing the gentle S-curve of his collarbone. Nancy had never seen him dress so casually, and it struck her that he appeared much younger than his 30 years. "Earth to Maria." Travis was getting impatient. "Go ahead. I'll catch up." Nancy did her best to project calm, and Travis just shrugged as he headed onto the ship. The ramp jostled again, and Nancy clung to the railing as Jonathan approached. He immediately recognized the white dress, and the sea breeze billowed her skirt and tousled her hair. He couldn't help thinking that this woman was the embodiment of wild beauty. "Jonathan!" Despite everything, Nancy did her best to maintain an air of detachment, as if their intimate morning at the hotel had never happened. Jonathan nodded in response, and his eyes drifted across her ghostly pale face as a group of children ran up behind him. One of them tugged at Jonathan's clothes. "Stay away from her, Uncle Jay. Don't you know she eats people?" Jonathan arched his eyebrows. "And how do you know that?" "Steve said so, and she admitted it." The boy clutched his chest protectively.
She said she likes little boys' hearts the best.
Jonathan barely concealed a smile. Don't worry about her. As long as I'm around, she wouldn't dare eat anyone's heart. The kids looked soothed, and a brave child stepped forward to confront Nancy.
I'm not afraid of you. With Uncle Jay around, nobody can eat us.
Jonathan's presence had eased her panic, and Nancy took on a ferocious expression as she leaned toward the boy.
What makes you think I won't eat his heart too?
The boy's confidence evaporated. Suddenly, Nancy lunged at him with her hands out like claws, and the children all screamed as they fled onto the ship. Nancy and Jonathan were alone again, and the air was thick with tension. Jonathan smiled coyly and looked Nancy up and down. You know, sometimes weakness isn't incompetence. It's just a part of human nature that no one can escape. Nancy looked puzzled, so Jonathan clarified. If you're seasick, there's no need to force it. With that, he turned and walked onto the yacht. Nancy was desperate to explain, but she knew she never could. She had always been bad at asking other people for help, and she'd developed an even harder shell since she was reborn. But if her past could paralyze her this easily, then Steve was right. She needed to admit it and face her fears head on. Taking a deep breath, Nancy steeled herself and continued onto the ship. Nancy made her way inside and was struck by the stiff atmosphere. All the faces were unfamiliar, and most appeared to be around 27 or 28 years old, likely friends of Jonathan's. Most of the women wore bikinis, and they seemed to travel in packs, always whispering and laughing. It struck Nancy that it felt exactly like the parties 2 weeks earlier, just with fewer clothes. Just then, a girl flew past Nancy and wrapped Jonathan in a hug. Nancy was shocked by their intimacy and realized she had never considered whether Jonathan had a girlfriend. Jonathan turned and greeted her with a smile. Kim, you're here early?
I wasn't going to miss Steve's birthday.
Kim eyed the bag in Jonathan's hand. What ridiculously overpriced gift did you bring? Jonathan rolled his eyes at her and walked over to Steve. Happy birthday, nephew. You're one of a kind, and so is your gift. I picked every detail myself. Steve tore open the box and held up the key to a new Rolls-Royce.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Nancy thought he looked like a kid getting candy and couldn't help but laugh. As she was about to approach Steve with her own gift, Kim suddenly noticed her walking over. Who is she? I don't think I've seen her before, Kim said. Steve followed her gaze to Nancy, and his smile grew tight. He hesitated for a moment before averting her gaze, and an eerie silence filled the room. Nancy knew it was pointless to wait for Steve to introduce her. I came to Steve's birthday party today because I have something to say. Steve's expression darkened, and he shot Nancy a warning look. Was she really threatening to tell his secret to all of his closest friends? On his birthday? Suppressing his anger, he announced through gritted teeth. This is my girlfriend, Maria. The silence was suddenly filled with clamoring voices. So you're Maria. I wonder what she got Steve. Jonathan just gave him a Rolls, so she's screwed. Steve saw an opportunity to embarrass her and seized it. His tone was saccharine, but his grin was malicious. Well, what is it, honey? A limited edition wallet? I know you love money, he said. She silently handed him the gift, about the size of a shoebox, and he untied the bow with a small, cruel smile. A crowd gathered around, and he lifted the lid to reveal a toy robot. After a tense moment, the same voices cut in. I told you she was screwed. Did she really get him a toy? Cut her some slack, she's practically a kid. Unfazed, Nancy took the toy from the box and held it up. It's not just a toy. It's a symbol of love and dedication. As she spoke, she revealed the intricately engraved robot. The details were immaculate, and the two arms were marked with his name and the day they first met. Nancy had prepared for the scrutiny. She knew she couldn't afford the same gifts the others could, so she drew on Maria's memories of love and sacrifice. Though Nancy thought Maria naive, and Steve undeserving of such adoration, she also felt Maria's sincerity deserved to be respected. Silence fell as the room absorbed her words. This is Frida. Frida is an intelligent robot, with a sophisticated AI interface designed specifically to interact with Steve. I modeled it, built it, and programmed it myself. It may not be as valuable as a sports car or a wallet, but it's also one of a kind. But if the value of a gift is based solely on its price, then I guess I'm not the right person to give gifts. The crowd was speechless, and Steve struggled not to frown as he realized he'd lost the upper hand. Nancy set Frida on the ground, pressed a remote control in her hand, and smiled as Frida sprang to life. Its eyes lit up, it turned its head, and rolled right up to Steve. Sensing his foul mood, Frida spoke up in a synthetic monotone voice. What's wrong, Steve? Do you not like me? Steve was caught off guard, and his mind raced, trying to imagine what Nancy's game was. After a few seconds, Frida calmly chimed back in. That's okay, Steve. I'll initiate the self-destruct sequence. Just pretend I was never here. A few people gasped, and Steve's gaze shot over to Nancy. She offered him nothing but a placid smile, and saw him realize that she really might be unpredictable enough to destroy the gift that she had poured her heart into. He hurried over and picked up Frida. It's not that I don't like you. I was just surprised. Don't self-destruct. He shook his head. I can't believe I'm talking to a robot. A red light on Frida's head flickered menacingly for a moment before stopping. It looked at Steve and tilted its head. Steve, look how nervous you are. I was just teasing you. Steve's eyes narrowed, realizing that he had been outplayed by both the robot and its creator. He resisted the urge to throw Frida into the Long Island Sound. Frida continued. If I can offer an important lesson on your birthday, life is too precious to base your self-worth on the opinions of others. Some of us may already have less time than we think, so the only people's opinions we should care about are the ones we love. Who do you love, Steve? Steve's jaw dropped, and everyone exchanged bewildered glances. Standing off to the side, Jonathan's gaze fell on Maria, her enigmatic smile, the white dress he'd given her. Was it crazy to think she'd intended Frida's message for him too? But how could she have known about his fear of death? As Steve stammered out a response to the toy robot, Jonathan saw the edge of Maria's lips curl ever so slightly into a wicked grin. Without thinking, a faint whisper rolled off Jonathan's lips. Nancy? Jonathan was about to cross the room to speak to Nancy when the atmosphere suddenly became electric. Your girlfriend's fascinating. Yeah, why haven't you mentioned her before? Beauty and brains? What does she see in you, Steve? Nancy hadn't expected her gift to win a group of admirers among Steve's wealthy friends, but their attitudes had shifted from dismissive to friendly in the blink of an eye. Nearby, Kim picked Frida up and noticed the hand-carved names on its arms. Jonathan, look at this. She must really love him. Jonathan glanced at it, then back at Nancy, his eyes narrowing. Suddenly, Frida spoke up. You must be Kim. You are even more beautiful than in your pictures. Can we be friends? Kim laughed. With compliments like that, of course. She turned to Jonathan. You hear that? Frida's got game. Jonathan chuckled, but kept his eyes on Nancy. Across the room, Nancy felt the yacht slowly pulling away from the pier. As the crowd churned around her and the boat began to rock, Nancy felt her earlier panic rising once again. She excused herself to the bathroom, but the cramped, windowless space brought back agonizing memories of Stark's yacht. Barely mustering the strength to exit the restroom, she stumbled onto the empty upper deck. Nancy gripped the deck railing and tried to breathe in the fresh air, but harrowing memories continued to lap over her like waves, pulling her under. She saw Stark snapping her ankle tendons like piano strings, feeling the searing pain when Amelia doused her with sulfuric acid. The ship rocked beneath her feet and she doubled over, leaning way out past the railing. Just as she was about to tumble overboard, someone grabbed her arm, yanking her back from the edge. Nancy's body trembled. She was soaked in cold sweat, and her eyes were wide with panic. But this time, the face of her rescuer didn't surprise her. Of course it was Jonathan. He looked at her with concern as she clenched her teeth and hyperventilated. "Maria, I'm calling a doctor for you." I don't need one." Her voice was desperate, and she held her arms tightly, her nails nearly breaking her skin through her shirt. She looked up at him, eyes pleading. "Jonathan, if you're terrified of something, but you have to face it, how do you do it?" He thought for a moment, avoiding her gaze, when he noticed that her dress had become translucent with sweat. "Head on," he replied firmly. "Bravery isn't the same as not being afraid. Bravery is accepting your fear and overcoming it." Nancy knew he was right, but she barely had the strength to stay on her feet. Jonathan glanced down at the vice grip she still had on his arm. "And if you need help, ask for it. Going it alone isn't bravery either. It's ego." A minute or so later, Nancy released his arm. Her face was slowly regaining its color, and she looked up at him with gratitude. "Thank you, Jonathan." He didn't respond, just stood by the railing, looking into the distance, and waited for Nancy to regain her balance. When she could finally support herself, he stepped back inside and re-emerged with the beach towel. "What's that for?" Jonathan glanced meaningfully toward her chest. She looked down and saw that sweat and sea spray had soaked her dress through, leaving her thin underwear plainly visible. "Oh, I see." She muted in embarrassment. He draped the towel over her body and helped her sit. After a moment, he abruptly spoke up. "What you said when you gave Steve his gift, was that true?" Nancy knew exactly what Jonathan meant, but after everything that had happened between them, she couldn't afford to keep getting distracted. Channeling Maria's intense love for Steve, Nancy met Jonathan's gaze. "It was. Every word of it." He was shocked by her sincerity and gave a half-hearted laugh. "My mistake, then. You clearly do love him. He's a lucky man." With that, they both fell silent. Nancy wanted to ask him about Kim, and why he wasn't with her now, and why he'd follow Nancy up there to begin with. But she knew she couldn't. She was Steve's girlfriend, and that wasn't going to change. A few hours later, the yacht arrived at the Davises' private island off the coast of the Hamptons. On shore, the chef prepared a barbecue lunch with fresh seafood, but Nancy was so happy to be back on land that she took off her shoes and went for a walk down the beach. She spotted a large black rock jutting out into the surf and scrambled out to its farthest edge. She heard laughter drift over from the other side of the island and felt wistful for a time when she could simply enjoy her life. She was grateful for whatever stroke of fate had given her a second chance. But every minute she spent as Maria had to be calculated and uncompromising. She felt like a soul adrift, with one foot in life and the other in death. Of her family, only her brother remained, and even her best friend's fate was uncertain. She couldn't help but wonder if she could ever see them again, if her entire life was just some cruel cosmic joke. As the sun blazed down on the beach, young men huddled around Steve, and their laughter punctuated the air. The line for food began to thin out, and one of Steve's friends spoke up. "Hey, where's Maria? I haven't seen her since we docked." Steve frowned at the sound of her name. He scanned the beach, but saw no sign of her. "She must have gone for a walk." A teasing grin spread across another friend's face. "That girl is head over heels for you, and you don't even know where she is? If I were her, I'd be out shopping for a new boyfriend." "Yeah, right. Who's she gonna find that's a better catch than Steve? His uncle?" "What's up with him anyway? Haven't he and Kim been dating for like 6 years? Why don't they just get married already?" "Married? They don't even hold hands. I bet he hired a fake girlfriend to keep the press off his back." "Everybody shut up." Steve was annoyed by the gossip. "They're not dating and they never said they were.
We all grew up together, so he looks after her like a sibling, the same as he does for me. Besides, he said 1,000,000 times he won't get married until after he's 32. Because of that rumor about his cursed genes? Does he seriously believe that?
Just then, Jonathan and Kim walked up and the group fell into an awkward silence. Jonathan sat down and beautifully prepared a grilled fish for Kim. Watching Jonathan dote on her, Steve's friend turned to him with a smirk.
See, that's how you treat a beautiful woman.
Steve's expression turned icy, but he held his tongue. With the supply of fish beginning to dwindle, he sighed deeply, put one on a plate, and stormed off in search of Maria. Before long, he spotted her in the distance, still sitting on the black rock. Her white dress and dark hair whipped in the wind, and she looked vulnerable in a way he had never seen her before. He hurried the rest of the way, and when he finally set the food down next to her, she looked up at him in surprise. My, bringing his girlfriend lunch? Is Steve going soft? His expression hardened at her double entendre. So much for being vulnerable. Why are you sitting out here alone? If the tide comes in and the waves swallow you up, I'll be the prime suspect. Nancy took the plate and picked at the food. Don't worry. Dying like that isn't part of my plan. But thanks for your concern. His eyes grew colder still, and he abruptly turned to leave. Nancy's anger pricked at her mind like thorns until she suddenly turned and shouted at him. Why did you bring me this? Did my confession of love move you? Don't worry, I won't laugh. Your love language is just unique. Steve stopped in his tracks and spun around, sneering. In love with you? Ah! I don't even think about you. And if it wouldn't be such an inconvenience, I'd be fine if a wave did pull you under. He clenched his fists, no longer bothering to conceal his rage. Seeing this, Nancy leapt to her feet, stepping toward him. If you're so confident, then why don't we make a bet? His dark eyes burrowed into her, and his face contorted with disgust. But Nancy just grinned. She leaned in and whispered seductively. I bet before our year is up, you'll fall for me so hard it knocks the wind right out of you. Steve leaned back and took her by the chin. His voice was icy and sharp. Over my dead body. Fine by me, love. Just then, Kim and Jonathan approached to the rocky outcrop and Kim spotted Steve holding Maria by the chin. She smiled playfully. Looks like we're interrupting something. Jonathan just narrowed his eyes. When has Steve ever shown her affection? You saw him this morning with that robot. He looked like he wanted to throw it into the ocean. Suddenly aware of Kim and Jonathan watching, Steve released Nancy's chin and stormed off without a word. Nancy offered them a knowing smile, then returned to her fish, resolved to regain control of her emotions. As Nancy finished eating, Kim approached with Jonathan trailing behind her. Maria, I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk. I absolutely adore that robot you made for Steve, and I was hoping I could commission you to build me one. I know it's time-consuming, though. Take however long you need, and I'll even pay you up front. Nancy glanced at Jonathan and smiled innocently. I'm sure you don't need one of my little robots. Surely your boyfriend's company has plenty of skilled technicians who can build you a more sophisticated one in no time. Jonathan? My boyfriend? Not in this lifetime. Kim blushed at the notion. Besides, your robot is much cuter than theirs. Like you said, it's one of a kind. Nancy opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, Jonathan lunged forward and tackled her to the ground. She heard the piercing clink-clink of metal striking rock and whipped around to see 2 steel nails jutting out of the rock where her head had just been. Nancy's blood rushed, and she sprang to her feet, scanning for an escape. Clink, clink, clink. Jonathan grabbed Nancy by the wrist and yanked her off the rock. Then he turned to Kim. Run back to the others. No matter what you hear, don't turn around. Just keep running until you get there. Kim's face paled, but she nodded once and ran off, barely avoiding another hail of metal. Before Nancy could react,
Jonathan took her sprinting in the other direction, nails whizzing by their heads and burrowing into the rock face behind them. They skidded to a halt behind another rocky outcrop, and Nancy tumbled into Jonathan's arms. She looked up in terror as a pair of speedboats bore down on them from both sides. A huge man in a black mask leapt off the lead boat and pointed his gun directly at Nancy's head. "On your knees! Hands up!" Jonathan and Nancy kneeled on the beach and raised their hands in surrender. The man sneered. "So this must be the beautiful Kim we've heard so much about. Tell me, why doesn't Mr. Davis ever take you out in public?" Nancy looked at Jonathan, mind racing, but he continued glaring at the man with the gun. "If you came here to kill us, we'd already be dead. So let's just get to the point." "Right down to business. No wonder you're so successful. It's simple, really. You call off your team and abandon the bid for the unmanned vehicle project, and young Kim gets to live." "I'll give you the project, but you have to guarantee her safety." "We're all businessmen here. Killing is a last resort." Suddenly, Nancy understood Jonathan had knowingly put her in harm's way to protect Kim. She was no more than a worm on a hook. Nancy looked over at Jonathan with a mix of shock and fury, but he just smiled reassuringly, playing the part of a concerned lover. "Don't be afraid, Kim. You'll be okay." She seethed as he unlocked his phone and placed a call to his assistant Andrew. He picked up immediately.
Sir, I'm at the bidding site. It's about to start.
"We're killing the bid, Andrew. Go home."
But sir, we've been planning this bid for 3 years. This could be the biggest contract we've ever—
"I don't pay you to question me. Just do what I said." With that, one of the gunmen snatched Jonathan's phone and hurled it into the ocean. Jonathan turned to the leader, still implacably calm. "It's done. Will you let her go now?" "Tisk, tisk, Mr. Davis. You forgot to read the fine print. I never said I'd let her go. I just said I wouldn't kill her. For now." As the leader gloated, Jonathan suddenly lunged forward, yanking Nancy behind him and disarming the nearest gunman. He shot him in the head, then spun his limp body around to use a shield just as the rest of the gunmen opened fire. Bullets and nails whizzed by Nancy as she cowered behind Jonathan. Suddenly, she heard the unmistakable thump of a bullet hitting flesh and felt a rush of heat on her face. She was sure she'd been hit until she looked up and saw one of the gunmen crumple to the ground. His blood and brain matter had been splattered across her face, and in an instant, she threw up the grilled fish she'd just eaten. Before Nancy could reorient herself, Jonathan grabbed her arm and pulled her onto one of the speedboats. The engine roared to life, and bullets ricocheted off its hull like fireworks as they sped away. As nails rained down on them, Jonathan pulled Nancy in front of him to shield her. "You okay?" "Just drive!" Nancy was terrified, but refused to make him feel like a hero. Suddenly, Jonathan grunted in pain, his body shaking. Nancy was unsure if he'd been hit, but she didn't dare to ask. Just as they started to gain distance on the boat behind them, Nancy spotted 2 more coming from the other side. She shouted over the roar of the engine. "We've got company!" "We'll lose them. Just hang on." Now, on the open sea, 3 boats formed a triangle with Jonathan out front, weaving to avoid the gunfire. Nancy squinted against the wind and spotted a tiny island up ahead. Suddenly, the speedboat started to decelerate. Jonathan spoke with urgency. "Listen up. There's a strong current here, so we'll steer into it, abandon the boat, and swim to that island. The current will take the boat farther out to sea and buy us some time before they realize we're not on it." Nancy nodded in agreement, and with a final burst of speed, Jonathan got them as close to the island as he could. "You go first, and I'll follow you." "You didn't even ask if I can swim." "I know you were a high school swimming champion. Save the attitude for when we're safe." With a deep breath, Nancy leapt off the boat. Jonathan set the engine to autopilot and plunged in after her. But as he hit the water, a searing pain shot through his left shoulder. He gritted his teeth and fought through the pain. And up ahead, Nancy swam hard and didn't look back. Gasping for air, Nancy dragged herself onto the rocky beach. She laid down to catch her breath, but when she finally sat up, there was no sign of Jonathan. She scanned the water and soon spotted him in a tangle of seaweed about 50 feet away. She remembered him getting hit during their escape and felt a twinge of guilt before reminding herself this was all his fault to begin with. Jonathan's face was ghostly pale, his eyes were half closed, and wet hair plastered to his forehead. The dire circumstances had erased his dominating presence, but even now he exuded an air of nobility. Nancy checked that he was breathing, then turned and walked away. She searched the island for a place to hide and discovered it was barely larger than a football field. There were no trees, and based on the minimal vegetation, Nancy surmised that only a small tip would be visible during high tide. Thankfully, she still managed to find a place to hide. A natural hollow in the reef, high enough to avoid the high tide, and barely large enough for 2 people. Just as she settled down, she heard movement outside. She feared the men pursuing them had caught on to their plan and circled back. But as she scrambled to find something to defend herself with, a shadow crossed over the opening. "I thought you would come back for me." Jonathan stepped into the dim light. His lips were pursed, and his condition was grim. Pain flashed across his face as he sat down, and then he calmly repeated himself. "I thought you'd come back for me." Nancy scoffed. "You nearly got me killed. Why would I help you?" Jonathan stared at her for a moment, then said softly, "I'm sorry." In truth, Jonathan had never meant to involve Maria in this. He knew the HQ group had been after the same contract as him, but he only learned the day before that they'd been asking around about Kim. What no one but him knew was that Kim had been fighting a rare bone disease since childhood. Her health had always been poor, and Jonathan knew that an escape like this one they just had made would have almost certainly killed her. He wanted to explain it to Maria, that he had only made the rational choice, but he knew she had the right to hate him. As the silence grew heavy, Jonathan's labored breathing filled the space, and the pain in his shoulder became unbearable. He took a knife from his pocket and handed it to Maria. "Would you mind getting this nail out of my shoulder?" Afraid she would refuse, he added, "When we're rescued, I'll reward you handsomely. So don't think of it as helping me. Think of it as helping yourself." Maria took the knife and snapped back at him. "I don't want your money. You helped me on the yacht, so now we're even. Save the rest for someone who cares." Jonathan's lips twisted into a wry smile. "All right." He stood up and removed his shirt, and Maria staggered at the sight of his wound. The steel nail was buried so deep in Jonathan's flesh, it was barely visible. Blood had soaked his entire shirt, and after being drenched in seawater, his entire shoulder had turned a ghastly white. She stepped back. "Lie down across my legs. I'll do my best, but no promises." Jonathan silently agreed. The light in the cave was dim, with only a few shards of sunlight filtering through the holes in the rock. Nancy picked up the knife and her hand immediately shook. Less than a month ago, Stark had used a knife just like this one to slice the tendons in her hand. Jonathan could feel her trembling. "I trust you. Just do it. I can handle the pain." His warm breath brushed against Nancy's legs, and the weakness in his voice lent it an unexpected tenderness. Gathering her courage, Nancy made a forceful cut, and blood oozed from the wound. She could feel Jonathan's muscles tense around the thin fabric of her dress, and couldn't help but think of her own suffering. Her voice softened. "Hold on. I need to make another incision before I can pull it out. You're doing great. Do what you need to do." Her next cut was more confident, and as blood flowed freely from the wound, she clamped the nail with the pliers on the other end of Jonathan's knife. She yanked it out with force, and the nail clattered onto the rocky floor. She felt Jonathan's muscles relax, and used the knife to tear his discarded shirt into 2 strips of cloth. She folded one into a square to staunch the bleeding, and used the other one to bandage it. "All right, you're done." Gritting his teeth, Jonathan looked at Nancy with gratitude. "Thank you. Does that mean you're ready to get out of my lap?" He rolled his eyes and slowly sat up. leaning against the wall for support. Now how the hell are you going to get us out of here? My watch has a GPS function, but I can't get it to turn on. I think I could fix it if my left hand wasn't numb. Nancy glanced at his watch. As she removed it, Jonathan added, "Want me to walk you through it?" "Want me to walk you through how much more complicated a robot is than a watch?" "Fair enough." It was late afternoon now, and sunlight poured through the cave's openings. Jonathan sat back against the stone wall and watched Nancy work on the watch. He piped up, "The bad part is probably the contact, but the chip is integrated, so once you open it, don't cut the battery or the entire system will reset. I know." Jonathan smiled wryly. Nancy worked and cursed under her breath. "You were right about the contact. It's shot. I'll see if I can rewire it directly to the power unit." As Nancy continued working, Jonathan was rapidly losing strength. He struggled to stay awake as she was finally finished reassembling the watch and turned it on. It worked. She sighed with relief and showed it to Jonathan. "Looks like I saved you twice today." As the screen lit up with their location, Jonathan's lips curved into a smile. "Thank you," he whispered. But Nancy didn't respond. She turned away from him and sat silently, awaiting their rescue. After a while, she glanced over and could see that he was drifting into unconsciousness. They were inches apart, but also miles away.